Welcome back to Tactical and Practical, brought to you by IntelliGems and Postscript. I'm your host, as you know, but today I've got a very special guest. He's been in email marketing for 15 years now, almost a couple decades. He's founded a bunch of companies in the space, and for the last couple of years, he's been putting on some of the best events and conferences in e-commerce with Commerce Roundtable. I'm super excited to jam on email stuff with you. Jimmy Kim, what's going on, dude?
What's up, Nate? Thanks for having me here, brother.
Dude, so good to have you. And let me first say, the conferences have been great.
Thank you.
Those events, I think sometimes get shit on Twitter from people who aren't invited. But they've been really good, really, really good. You and Nick do a great job of putting together a good lineup. And then even the attendees, it's all a bunch of sneaky brands I've never heard of doing 50 million a year. And it's oh shit. So props to you on that. Hats off.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Let's dig into segmentation strategies, because I think there's a lack of clarity around this subject. I think a lot of marketers hear it and think they need to make their email list smaller and send to fewer people. And I'll be honest, I thought that for a long time, and I was like, I don't want to do that. Send it to everyone. Who cares? Is that a common objection that people have? Is that a common point of confusion that you see?
Yeah, so let's talk about it. I think segmentation is a really interesting topic because I think everybody in their head wants, desires, and understands that it's really important, but the understanding of how to apply it in a business is generally pretty tough, right? So I kind of think about it when I think about it. I think about like 3 steps. All right, I'll kind of break this down so you can kind of, the listeners of this pod can kind of understand how you should be thinking about it. So the most simple of them all, and when you just said it, most people, when they think about segmentation, it's very simple. I'm going to essentially take people and use my engaged behavior signals and batch them into a 30, 60, 90 day or 120 day segment of all my subscribers. I'm going to send my email, right? That's how most people are using segmentation. That's like 90% of the brands out there right now and today. And look, it works. But the problem is it doesn't create the effect that you're supposed to do. And all you're really doing is really just doing list hygiene ultimately in real time and essentially scrubbing out those who are inactive and making sure that you're getting to the most active people. And that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with it. But the reality is that's how most people learn. And the way that most people learn are usually ineffective. All right. So when I think like that, that's like the basics. That's like the rudimentary. Then you go kind of like into step 1. Step 1 is when people get that light bulb and realize, hey, I should really just start thinking about how to split my audience up in the most basic rudimentary ways. And this is where I tell people to get started. The first thing I tell people is just simply split up your audience into 3 different groups: your prospects, your buyers, and your customers. Why? Well, the reality is very simple. Well, what's the point of a prospect? You're trying to get them to make their first sale. A point of a buyer is to get them to the second sale. And then your VIPs, your repeat customers, well, we know they're your most loyal. We want to get them to that second, third, fourth, fifth sale. So ultimately,
that's the definition split between buyers and customers for you. A buyer is a one-time buyer. Customer is a multi-time purchaser.
Correct. Because if they make one impulsive purchase, what are they? They've just made a single purchase. They're not loyal. They're not into your brand. They're simply just making that one purchase. And you know this, Nate, like only 30% of your customers ever going to make more than one purchase, right? And so you know that, but unfortunately, people take those 3 segments and try to treat them exactly the same. The reality is you don't need to treat them the same, because a prospect, for example, oftentimes when you're thinking about it, you're just trying to get them to lead to a buyer. So you got to be more aggressive. You got to be in front of them. You got to be attacking them. And essentially, as a marketer, you want to give them your best offers, your deals, trying to get them to convert into a sale. And you generally are a little bit more aggressive. And then when you got your buyers, these people have spent money, pulled out their wallets and have spent money, bought your product, whatever that might be in your case, like watches or anything else. You've already at least got one layer of trust. They've got your product in their hand. And now it's time to really educate them and build your brand story and really get them engulfed and trying to get them to lead them to make that second purchase, right? And then you've got your customers. These are your most loyal people. These are the ones that love you and they've made multiple purchases with you and so forth. So that is like step 1. Like that's the step 1, most basic rudimentary use of segmentation that I think that every marketer, especially in 2025, should at least be doing today. Like if you're not doing that, then you need to go apply that before you listen to anything else that we're talking about. All right, then you go to step 2. Step two is like when you start going, all right, I'm going to start being a little bit more of a Jedi. I'm going to start thinking about things a little bit more. You start thinking about, all right, not just prospects, but I'm taking my prospects and start splitting them up by source, right? If a prospect comes in from an opt-in from here versus a newsletter or blog or from a free channel, each one of those has a different intent, goal, and want and need. And you start thinking about how to start separating those people and messaging in different ways, right? So you start thinking that way. You start thinking the same thing with your customers. You start thinking about your category, you think about your what they purchased, what the what's that called? What the intent was, how long it was. Like all of these things start changing, right? A customer who has purchased in the last 30 days has a higher likelihood of making a purchase versus 60 days out, 90 days out, 120 days out. Now, there's always caveats to all of that, right? Like your data within your own store is going to tell you that own story. Just like prospects, like, okay, you take a prospect, and we'll go back to that one because it's a really interesting one to think about. If you think about a prospect and they've opted in and made a purchase in your welcome flow, right? We know how that works, right? It's really your email marketing is just supporting your acquisition. That's not really doing your job as an email marketer. That's just really just support to your acquisition. But once that's passed through, every day that's gone further and further away, the longer that sales cycle is happening, and you already have an average sales cycle, so you can start splitting your prospect up by the time when they've opted in, where they've opted in, and start really thinking about their journey and thinking about why they're not purchasing. If it's been 90 days since they've opted into your list and they have not made a purchase, what is happening? Something's not resonating. Something's not in stock. Something's not creating an effect ultimately for a person. And that's generally what's happening, right? So when you start thinking of the second layer, it's really just starting to think about, can you think about their customer journey? Can you start really understanding where they are in their journey, and how do you talk to them in the correct way through their journey? Just like a buyer, again, in the first 30, 60, 90 days, you've got that window to keep their attention, capitalize, and try to turn them into a loyal customer. But ultimately, if you can't get them to convert at that point, they start becoming more of a prospect than they become a buyer. We know that they're real, they've got money, but the reality is a lot of them aren't going to make that next purchase because it's not resonating, or they didn't like your product. I mean, that's the truth of it, right? At the same time. And then so you go through these steps and you go through that one, and then you start thinking about the third layer. The third layer is when people start really enlightening me. Do you know have you ever heard the term RFM before, Nate?
RFM? No.
Yeah. Okay. So that's recency, frequency, monetary, right?
Okay.
That's what it stands for. This is not something brand new. I'm not inventing it. I'm not creating it. When I started email marketing in 2008, that's how we learned how to do what we call today modern segmentation. And tools today that are out there, from email tools to SMS tools, all have the segmentation ability to create them. But recency, frequency, monetization is very simple. Recency is when did they purchase last, or when did they opt in? Frequency is how often have they purchased, or how often have they visited your site, for example. And monetary becomes the value dollar and driven behind it. Now, when you start understanding that, you start realizing that there's all these different segments of users that come into place. And when you start thinking about that, it goes into like thinking about like champions and loyal customers and high value customers and low value customers. And you start splitting your audience up in generally about 11 to 12 different segments that you can really build into, which are really telling you where they are and where they stand within. And you can use this formula. So back in the day in 2008, I would download my entire list of all my data. I would take all that data and I would split them up, and then I would re-upload them as CSVs back into the system. Well, today's modern platforms will allow you to do it right there in front of you and set those things up, right? Now, this is where it gets really, where segmentation really gets like powerful when you start understanding it. You know what the core of retention is, right? It's CLTV. That's the core, right? It's not about your first purchase or just making a conversion on an email. It's how to take a customer, keep them engaged, and create lifelong customer value out of them, right? Over the next year, over the next 2 years, until they churn out, because eventually everyone has an end to a life cycle. So if I'm looking at the RFM process, this is where I think about, right? I think about this. First of all, most your money and retention, because you're really focused on taking a customer, making a repeat purchase, like that's the core of what a retention marketer is doing, is found 80% of that revenue from your campaigns that you send is going to be found in your customer base, your buyer base, essentially, or your customer base. So I always tell people it's a really simple framework. There's a framework that I love using that I teach people all the time, and it really makes a big difference of like how to start thinking bigger behind it. So you take your customer base, and you figure out what your average order value is or average customer lifetime value is, for example. This is the monetary side. And then you start splitting those up, and I bring them up to 3 buckets: your lower 20%, your middle 60%, and your higher 20%. And what this really means is simple. Your lowest 20% are people who are way lower on the bell curve, of people who have not spent a lot of money, who have bought maybe your discount product, your cheapest products, different things that they are just only going to make a deal when they feel that there's a relevant thing that they want. And most often in e-commerce, it's discounts, right? Like they only want the best discounts. Those are your bottom 20%. Then you got your middle 60% of people who are going to be your average buyers, the people who are buying around the average spectrum. And then you've got your top 20%, which are the people who are your high value customers, your high frequency buyers ultimately. And if you split that up and you use that thought process, and then you start setting goals behind this is where segmentation gets really powerful. What do I know about my 20% on the bottom? Well, the only way I'm going to get them to buy more is because they're going to be a more discount buyer or someone who needs a special event or a push, versus my 60% buyer, who's going to be my people who are more likely to purchase because they've spent the money, they've bought it at a real time during a product, or they've paid enough, and I know that I can make them into a loyal customer, versus my top 20%, which is going to be my most loyal and impactful customer, the people who are spending dollars at my store. So if I split that up and I go after it and I think, all right, how do I take my lowest 20% and move them into my 60% bucket? How do I move my 60% bucket into my top 20% bucket? Suddenly your mindset changes and your segmentation that you're driving to drive that continues to change. Again, when I come back to that, it's like, how do I start bucketing my people up into different groups, right? And that's, to me, the core of what segmentation really means. I think that people often think too much about just simple things when you should be thinking about, like, who's ready to buy, who's at risk, who's responsive to promos, who's only seeking discounts, who's loyal, who's at the right time, is there upsell opportunities, win back opportunities? Like, all of these are like drivers of data that you're getting inside of your system. Unfortunately, most people aren't thinking about that.
Dude, what a rant, man.
Yeah,
that was unbelievable.
Well,
for everyone listening, I told them the topic 10 minutes before we hopped on air.
Yeah.
And you just crushed that. Go back and listen to that. I've been taking notes the entire time. That was gold. This episode of Tactical and Practical is brought to you by Postscript. We talk a lot about email segmentation on this episode, but you can apply a lot of the same principles to your SMS list, and there's no better platform to do it on than Postscript. They are singularly focused on making SMS the biggest and most profitable channel for your e-com store, and their new features and products that they have come out with have added so much money to our bottom line already. It is insane. I don't even believe it when they show me what they're working on and how it's helping us add dollars to the top and bottom line. But the proof is in the P&L. And we couldn't be happier with them as partners. So go to postscript.io, let them know I sent you, and start adding dollars to your bottom line with your SMS program today. Let me talk a little bit about like what that looks like for us.
Okay.
Because we're getting there. I'd say like we're at your second tier of segmentation, starting to enter your third here. And the way that I have kind of started to think about segmentation, it is not about quantity, it's about relevance. So like I want to make sure, I could craft an email today for our Valentine's Day sale. If I send it to everyone in our 120-day actives, there's a bunch of people that aren't in market for that. They maybe just bought for Christmas. They maybe are discount one and done shoppers. They maybe haven't bought in a year, but they're clicking on our emails, so they're still in our actives. And the way that I'm thinking about it now is like, well, hold on. I don't want to just send to the people who are primed to buy. I want to send to all those cohorts still. We just need to craft a message that makes sense to them. So for us, like we've been segmenting by similar to AOV, like what kind of price range of products have they bought from? Because we have a unique store where you can buy a watch from us for $150 or $600. Those are different people buying
Very
those.
different.
So one of our big wins out of Q4 was we would segment people by AOV essentially, and then we'd either send them an email that was promoting our gifts under 200 page of like, here's our cheaper watches, here's our bracelets, our necklaces, our sunglasses, accessories, and there's some great gifts in there. But people who have shown they're willing to spend on more expensive watches, we sent them to our high-end automatic mechanical movement watches. So we've done that a ton, and then we've also kind of batched out prospects by timeline, like what you've
Yes.
discussed a little bit. It's like someone who's signed up for our list in the last 30 days is a hot lead still. Someone who signed up a year ago and hasn't bought, that's a problem. Maybe we got to
Yeah.
get a little bit more aggressive on the offer. Maybe we got to show them something we haven't shown before. But what this means is we're actually sending more emails than ever.
Yes.
Which is what I like about it, because I was always in the camp of like, screw all segmentation. I'm just going to send emails to as many people as possible. Don't care about open rate, click through rate. I care about revenue. Let's send to everyone. But there's a lot of wasted sends in those campaigns. But now we're finding ways to like unlock relevant emails to send to different cohorts that aren't always primed to buy, or always aren't, primed to buy what we're offering in that email. And we are extracting so much more value per subscriber in our email list because of this. And yes, it's more work, because today we have to send 4 emails instead of 1, but that work has been more than worth it with the value we're getting out on the back end.
Yep, you're nailing it. Exactly what I'm talking about. You're splitting it. I mean, even to your prospects, I would tell you, like, make sure that you're aligning your prospects with the source of opt-in, right? Did they come through?
That's interesting. Yeah, we're not doing that yet.
If they came through an ad on Facebook, there's an impulse nature to those people versus people who came to your website directly on an organic site. They probably have a more warmth to you because they came to come find and seek you at that point, right?
That's interesting.
Different types of messaging, because an impulse buyer on Facebook, they saw an ad, and you should be thinking about what ad they saw, what the messaging you were doing during that time, and continue to echo that, because that's what got them to click ultimately, right? So,
and one thing that we should do that's a huge missed opportunity is we do a lot with YouTube creators. We'll sponsor their videos. We have some lifestyle content of them that we can use in our ads and our website. We should be tagging people who come from YouTube and then showing them that lifestyle content of their favorite creators who we work with already.
That's nailing it right there. And that's how you start grouping your audience together. But not only that, you also know a YouTube creator is driving a different type of audience value than a Facebook lead versus an organic lead. Like, these are all little inklings, especially on the prospect side, of how to like really start pushing a needle. But you've nailed it. Exactly what you guys are talking about and doing right now is exactly what I'm telling you. Like, those are the phases that people start realizing it. And once that unlock starts happening, you realize, yeah, you're writing 4 emails, but that's still okay, because that's still cheaper than going out and spending money on Meta. And the audience is right there in front of you, and they're warm. You just got to put effort and time behind it. And I know it's a resource problem for many brands. That's always the challenge. I know you're a small team, Nate, for example, and it's a challenge, but you've realized that there's such an unlock of dollars there. It's worth your time to go spend it there, because that's really where the money is, because you've worked so hard to acquire these leads. Don't lose those leads, and don't just keep building them. Actually do something with them.
This episode of Tactical and Practical is brought to you by IntelliGems. They are our profit optimization, profit growth platform. Every single time that performance is down, the first place I go after I look at the data. So the second place I go is to IntelliGems, because poor performance can usually be solved by testing content or prices or offers or features on our website. It's a more impactful testing ground than your ad account, because it's where 100% of your conversions are coming from. So go to IntelliGems.io if you want to start optimizing your website to extract the most profit for everyone that comes there. IntelliGems.io. Let them know I sent you. There's whiskey in this, 100%. Now let's talk about how that affects deliverability, because this is another topic that I think is like in a cloud of mystery that in years past, I've been like, fuck it. I don't know what it means. I don't understand it. It's probably fine. We're still making money from email. And I think a lot of the people that are preaching deliverability are often in the camp like send to less people, because you want to get those engagement metrics up, which I was always against, because I was like, screw engagement metrics. I just want money. But doing it the way we're talking about, where we're not just sending fewer emails, but we're sending more relevant messages to the right cohorts at the right time, that in theory is increasing all of our engagement metrics, which makes deliverability work a lot better, right?
Yeah, you're nailing it exactly right. The reason why deliverability and engagement exists is because people don't know how to segment out down and drill down and send relevant messages. Why don't people open email, Nate? It's because it wasn't relevant to you, right? When you look at your inbox and you're looking through and scrolling through everything, you're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. But when you're actually getting people active, they are, because people don't change email addresses that often.
No.
They do lose interest, they do lose whatever, but it's really a challenge of just like an ad, man. Like, how can your subject line scream in front of them the loudest and be the most relevant is what they're clicking on. So to your point, building these segments, not only are you already sending smaller batches of different emails, but you're also sending more relevant ones, which are ultimately going to get you a higher engagement rate. And engagement's not open rate, it's click rate, right? It doesn't matter how many people open an email. It really matters how many people click and engage with that email. That matters when it comes to deliverability. The biggest tip that I can give you, Nate, or to the listeners here today, is the thing that people aren't paying attention to today in deliverability is not that top line open and click rate. It's really drilling one level down and looking at your metrics across what we call your top level domains, your Google, your Yahoo's, your Microsofts, and looking at how those are performing. Because the problem with most people in deliverability is not that higher level. People think that overarching number matters, but what really matters is understanding where you might have problems. And that is probably the bigger things. And I'm talking about what is your open rate? What is your click-through rate in those different segments? A lot of people will have bad click-through rates on Apple, for example, or Hotmail or Microsoft, but they're really thinking that they have an issue with everything else. The reality is suddenly you've got a place to attack and deal with, and that's something that people don't think about. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, think about it that way. And deliverability is a challenge because for the first time since 2024 is the first time the deliverability switch flipped. Basically, it went from the ESP to the brand ultimately. And with the brand having the more control over it, it's pretty much the same as if you would have had a dedicated IP or a dedicated sending infrastructure is what happened in 2024. So those changes are just exposing the people who are doing bad things. And for you, Nate, and when you're looking at your data, just look at it as trends. Are you trending the right way? Are you flat? Are you looking going up? I mean, these are all you're really looking for. You're not, or are you seeing a massive drop? It's not about just that top level. That top level is really a false narrative that a lot of people fall under. You've got to be able to dive deeper into the analytics these days.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense there. And we saw it last year. We've grown our list a ton. We grew by 100% last year. And, we saw our deliverability score start to go down in like Q3.
Yep.
And at the time we were like hammering prospects super hard and doing more batch and blasting than we should have. And we started to see it go down, and we started to implement these changes. And what was cool is like we immediately saw it start working. Like we saw it go down for 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we were back to where we were before. And 2 weeks after that, we were better than we've ever been.
Yep.
So like, it's not like a huge amount of time or like a huge amount of work. And again, like if you can write one more email today and set up one more email and it makes you an extra $2,000, is your time worth more than $2,000 an hour? Because for most e-com brands, it's not.
No.
And it's like that doesn't sound like a lot, but do that 365 days now. It's like, cool, that's an extra $800,000 for your business. I think most of you listening would sign up for that. And if you don't have the time for it, you can hire someone with an $800,000 a year budget. So go do that. But yeah, this stuff has been crazy impactful for us. And I do think in the last couple of years of e-com that have been hard for a lot of people, Facebook seems to be less efficient for folks. Consumer behavior was just all over the place last couple of years. Like this stuff, I think matters more than ever, and applying it in this way where you're not just restricting yourself, you're actually increasing the amount of relevant emails you can send is 100% the right approach.
Yep. Nailed it, dude.
Dude, this was a fantastic podcast. I got to get you off this because people are going to be like, Nate sucks as a host. We got to get Jimmy on more. But where can people hear more of you? You've got the Awesome Podcast.
Yep.
I've got the Podcast.
I've got 2 podcasts. I've got the Awesome Podcast and then another podcast with Chase Diamond called Send It.
Yep.
where we just talk about all this stuff like retention and so forth. And we have a whole episode on segmentation. So if you liked and want to listen more about this stuff, we go on a rant for 40 minutes about segmentation. So
let's go. I'll
yeah,
link
check
that
it
in the
out.
chat here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Nate, for having me here, and I'm excited that I was able to talk about it. Obviously, a passion of mine to talk about it, and not very many people in the world who love segmentation as much as I. But
You
it's
love
only
it.
because I've seen the money, man. Like Nate,
Yeah,
the
it works.
money that people leave on the table is incredible right
I
now
know.
because they're not really digging into the data they have today, and they rather go focus on TikTok Shop or Meta or other places. But the money's right there. You just gotta get it.
It's one of my two big regrets of my career. One, not spending more money on Facebook ads in the last decade. Two is not understanding how much money is sitting in our list that I just looked at as like 120-day actives for way too long, for years. Yep. I was like, that's the segment we send to. Yep. But yeah, there's so much more to it than that. So I'll link that episode in the description below. People can follow you at Yo Jimmy Kim on Twitter, and Commerce Roundtable tickets on sale right now for Miami in April.
I got Miami and then San Diego later this year. So we've got 2 events this year. Very excited about it. And man, the topics are spicy. I'm about to start leaking out the topics here soon.
Nice.
They're gonna be good, man.
Can't wait. If you guys have not been, it's a fantastic conference. I've been to 2 of them now, trying to get to Miami this year. But yeah, hope to see you all there. Jimmy, thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Thanks, dude.